Good morning and welcome to Cheche, the show where opinion counts, live on Citizen TV. I'm your host, Udwaka Mimo. Now, universities are supposed to be centers of innovation and ideas that advance society. We expect our political leaders, whether national or continental, to have a university education. But wherever you look across the continent, education systems are in turmoil. Frequent strikes, poor remuneration for instructors, and discipline among students. But a partnership that brings together some of Africa's leading universities is attempting to address governance challenges here on the continent. It's the Partnership for African Social Governance and Governance Research, and it aims to produce the next generation of public policy leaders and researchers on the continent. And so our guests this morning are Professors Frederick Wanyama. He's the Deputy Principal in charge of Academic Research, Innovations and Extension at Murang'a University College, as well as Professor Tony Kabo of the United Nations affiliated University for Peace in Uganda. He's currently on secondment to the Uganda Martyrs University. We also have the regular panel of David Makali and Mutegi Njau. Good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you.
I'll begin with you, Professor Kabo, because you're the guest here. Give us an overview of university education and why it's so important to governance.
For us to understand the state of university education on the continent, we need to go back really into the 1980s. You would remember that this was the beginning of the so-called structural adjustment programs that brought about diminishing sort of investments in education from all countries across the continent. And so that era really brought about, or rather ushered in, a period where education was mostly neglected. And we saw, the demise of many of the outstanding universities. If you go to West Africa, for example, I come originally from Sierra Leone. The University of Sierra Leone, sort of the first university on the continent of Africa, really just deteriorated and up till now has not really recovered. Many other universities, University of Ibadan, University of Lagos, we saw universities just diminishing in terms of the quality of people they produced.
Was it the structural adjustment programs or the fact that a lot of African countries were going through a lot of instability at that time?
Well, this is just one of many factors. Structural adjustment programs brought about not just a demise in education, but in other areas. The social sector suffered immensely. We saw the health sectors suffering immensely. Many other areas, of course, suffered. But this was really the beginning of the neglect of the education sector. We are seeing some recovery now. Many African countries are beginning to reinvest in the education sector, although we must say that we are not nearly to the levels where we were prior to the structural adjustment program.
So that gives us some background. Professor Wanyama, why is it critical, though, to have university education? Why, in leadership, in governance, what difference does it make?
We have always known that the university is the space for concentrated reflection on society. And that gives the university the opportunity to relook at society, identify challenges, problems, and provide solutions to those challenges that have been identified in the society. And that's the only way that society can be transformed, by having a group of people whose task is always debating, reflecting on what is working, what is not working, and providing solutions. Without that kind of people thinking about it, we may fail to realize what is working and what is not working. And that's the essence of university education for us.
But is that what is happening? You're talking like you come from the moon or something?
No. I'm first of all addressing why the university. What's the purpose of the university? That's what it is. But why?
Ideally, yes.
In reality, I think my colleague has just given you one glimpse into why what you think is not happening is the scenario. But there is another scenario to it besides structural adjustment programs.
Yeah, but again, just on the same scenario issue, there was an issue of academic freedom, and that space being interfered with. Have you regained the space? He talked about the 80s, but I also recall the 80s to have been some of the most repressive times on the continent, when governments did not, tolerate critical thinking and that space producing anything to help government.
I absolutely agree with you. That's where actually I was headed before your intervention.
Proceed there, please.
That instructional adjustment is one, but the other side of it was the politics that obtained in Africa from the 70s, before even the SAPs came. From the 70s, many leaders that were around were actually not welcoming those reflections that university.
Actually, the bulk of our exiles at that point were academics.
They were academics, yes.
Right.
And you name them, there are several.
Right.
They were fleeing the political circumstances, which were not even allowing discussion. They were not allowing criticism. And those who are daring to go that length, they suffered consequences.
So that space is back.
The space
Would you
is
say
back.
it's back, and are you enjoying that space?
The space is back, and we are enjoying it. First on the teaching line, we have a lot of freedom to teach any aspect of the society, politically or otherwise, that we feel needs to be taught. I come from a political science background, and in the 80s, the political science department here was renamed for some strange reasons to become Department of Government. Today, the name is back. It's Department of Political Science. And so the space is now there. We are free to discuss. We are free to interrogate.
Are you free, or you've been co-opted? You've learned how to survive in a difficult environment?
I don't think it's being co-opted. It is about being allowed to do what we intend to do.
But you are allowed to do it. You are free to do it.
Yes.
You have the capacity to do it.
That's the other challenge which Gabo was trying to address. The capacity remains a serious challenge. With the new policy environment that was fronting the market to provide social services, education was roped into the same. And so the government was increasingly being pushed to reduce funding to university, and concentrating on lower levels of education like primary and so on. But in the process, universities were being encouraged to source for alternative funding mechanisms.
You're talking about things like the Millennium Development Goals, the Education for All, which focused on primary and secondary education at the expense of tertiary education.
Yes.
Where do we find ourselves now?
I think we are still in the same scenario. Much has not really changed. The funding to public universities actually continues to reduce every year, and the encouragement that we are being given we are being told to do is to find from the market avenues for raising additional funding. And when you go to the market, what do you find? For us, we train, we research. We will find students who are struggling to come into the university education.
Maybe you should hear from the foreigner here about the situation in this other
visitor,
countries.
you mean, not the foreigner?
Yeah, the visitor. He's not Kenyan. So the situation here is pathetic when it comes to higher education. You have universities, either public or private, in every little corner of the village, calling themselves university. The word university has lost meaning. They are asking that if you are from this district, and the university is that district, the vice chancellor must come from that district.
Okay.
Is that what is pertaining in those countries?
There are several issues in your question there. Let's start with just the fact of university education and whether it's irrelevant. And then we can come to, I think, what you're talking about, a local content to some extent. And then universities as a business.
I think perhaps we need to start with universities as a business. Because if you notice, post-structural adjustment and then Millennium Development Goals coming in, we saw that the education sector was largely liberalized across the continent. And so a lot of governments, in Africa began to sort of loosen their grip on tertiary education, particularly. And we saw this mushrooming of universities in the, held by private, stakeholders, and it brought about several challenges. First of all, the liberalization ushered in an era where anybody can do anything and offer any program, and many of the programs actually remaining within the liberal arts tradition. And liberal arts tradition does not necessarily address developmental challenges of our nation states on the continent.
And that speaks to curriculum development.
Absolutely.
And relevance.
And I'm not suggesting here that, in fact, liberal arts education is not relevant. What I'm suggesting is that we have too many, perhaps, liberal arts, tertiary institutions that really still focus on just a bachelor's degree. And if you move beyond that, perhaps that is where we begin to look at an important but separate issue, and that is the issue of leadership, the issue of governance, the issue of institution building and nation state making. That's where we begin to look at, in fact, maybe we can bring this in, this partnership for social and governance research on the continent. And that's where PASGAR is really playing a role, wherein we are looking at how do we move beyond just this bachelor education into some sort of postgraduate education that will begin to look at issues of policy and how policy must be informed by research, which is very important. Most of the time we look at policy issues from a very sort of ad hoc and perhaps not evidence-based kind of policy issues. And I think when David was opening our program this week, mentioned the idea that sometimes you wake up on one side of the bed and all of a sudden there is a policy out there that everybody must have to deal with.
And one of the policies, Mutegi was making the point, is that in terms of education now, because of our devolved system, we now require that institutions must have a percentage of local representation. And your point was, what does that do for education? Because instead of looking for the best person, you're looking for a person's background, looking at, rather.
The university has become a village polytechnic.
Perhaps one of the things we need to...
maybe what Dr. Kabo needs to address...
Just a minute. Let's address this village polytechnic idea.
At a continental level, or from Uganda.
But we have villages all over Africa, David.
That's what's happening also. What is happening in other countries.
I want to link this perhaps to some new development on a global scale. If you see what is happening in Iraq, you see that even the government of Iraq is now beginning to say this sort of quota system in government appointments based on identity or religion does not really work. And so perhaps the Kenyans must begin to take a very serious look at, are we really heading in this direction, in the right direction, when we begin to assign quotas based on local content, ethnicity, tribal affiliation and whatnot. And I think there is a serious danger in these types of approaches to addressing. Education is about really development. If we want to really seriously address developmental issues on the continent, I believe we should have a better way of doing these kinds of things rather than basing it on ethnicity or regional affiliation.
Professor Wanyama, because you're familiar with the Kenyan context, and marginalized communities would say that this is the best chance, this constitution and the legislation around quotas, that this is the best chance of accessing opportunities that they were previously excluded from.
Yeah, in terms of decentralization or distribution of university education across the space, it is something positive that is happening, and that does not make the university a village polytechnic the way Mutegi is putting it. And neither do those universities really concentrate people from those localities into the universities. No, they remain operating internationally as they used to be.
Look at what is happening in Eldoret University.
No, but
it's
also
now
look,
closed.
but also look at
what's the problem there?
Look at also what is happening to me. I am from Western Kenya,
and you're in
I am in Muranga.
Those people are accommodative. Other people are not.
Probably that could be in your opinion, but I think
look at what happened in Masai Mara University, now Eldoret University.
I think the point here is, how do we balance the desire to have universities spread all over the country and in localities of most communities, but still keep the international, the universal aspect inherent in those universities. And that's where the challenge comes in, because local communities are demanding that their university must have more of their people, including staff, teaching, as well as students.
I think what we need to do here is some awareness that the university is a universal institution.
Exactly.
And wherever it is located, it is not meant for that particular locality. It continues to be a universal institution and admitting students not just from that community, and that's what's happening here. The universities admit students from across the country without looking at where they come from. It's simply their qualification that leads them into a particular university.
But the communities would argue then, because think about the secondary school system, where the person with the best grades in a marginalized community finds themselves in a national school, whereas people with better grades are excluded from that institution, a premium institution of higher learning, and sent to an institution which they feel might not necessarily be to the standard of their grades. So again, we come back to the issue of balance. We want universality, but we also want to bring everybody on board. How do you do that when we have to accept that different regions have had different and sometimes compromised qualities and access to education?
I think we are already doing that. We have some affirmative action criteria in admission that the Kenya Universities and Colleges Central Placement Board has put in place by trying to lower by a point or so admission of some students from those regions that did not benefit, that are really disadvantaged. And that happened this year. And that's through the same affirmative action, for example, we have been trying to enhance gender representation in universities. So there is a mechanism that we are doing that, but it's not necessarily that everybody who comes from a locality where the university is located is admitted to the university. That doesn't happen.
My problem is recruitment, and that's what the beef is. Recruitment of staff, professors, vice chancellors, chairmen. That's what the problem is. The university is trying to a local thing. That's not university.
I think it's a matter of awareness, as I said earlier on. It's awareness so that people get to understand that the location of this institution does not translate it into just that local community alone. That it is a space for them to share with other international scholars, students that may be interested.
Prof, okay, so there's an admission that is
what has happened.
There's an admission of
what's happening in the rest of is that situation phenomenon in other countries?
I mean, Kenya is in a very unique situation. It's experimenting with devolution, and we see that the process of decentralization is bringing in new challenges, you know, of its own, education being one of them, and trying to create these conditions for affirmative action. Now, whether or not that's a temporary fix in order to bring about some parity in terms of numbers, in terms of perhaps, hopefully, quality of education, so that the marginalized, so-called marginalized communities will also come to a certain level where they can be at par. Now, if that's temporary, then that's good. But you know, if we continue to keep a system like that, in the long run, it's not going to be beneficial to the communities, because what then you will do is you are actually creating a cadre of technocrats that are inefficient and perhaps maybe incapable of doing the things for building institutions that will help to, you know, bring these communities to the national power and so on. And so I think if it is a temporary fix, then it is good. But if it is going to be a policy in the long run that's not going to really benefit the communities which they are intended to serve, then I think it's a policy that needs to be you know, given a second look.
Let's look at the content or the output from the universities, which is where it cuts.
I have to take a break. That's we'll need to dwell on that for some time. So let's take the break now and come back to that issue. This is Cheche. We're live on Citizen TV. Today's guests are making the case for higher education as being critical for governance. If you've got any thoughts, opinions, please SMS us. The number is 22422, or you can tweet us using the hashtag Cheche.